So my name is Pete Ellis, as Milan said, and I'm coming to you from Boston in Massachusetts in the United States. And in Boston, I'm a senior project manager with a green roof company called Recover Green Roofs. And we're a mission-driven green roof company that focuses on institutional green infrastructure, rooftop agriculture, and green roofs throughout the Boston area and the northeast part of the United States. So I have been working with Recover for about 10 years, and with my team have had the privilege to install tens of thousands of square meters. I've been trying to convert square meters to square feet, um, and trying to figure out how many square meters we have installed over the years. But we've installed a lot of green roofs and a lot of rooftop farms. And in addition to my work with Recover, I'm also an advisor to the City of Boston Office of Urban Agriculture, where I advise the office and the mayor on how to implement more urban agriculture within the city. That can be green roofs, it can be rooftop farms, and it also can be ground level growing spaces. And in addition to that, I'm also working with a number of think tanks and groups, working on some policy initiatives, as well as education. So before I begin, thank you, Branislav, for inviting me to speak today. Also, thanks to Dusty for making the introduction, and all of you for joining. It's really a pleasure to be here. This is my first time in the city, and it's been beautiful. I got here last night and had a nice walk around, and hoping to see it during the day as well. So today, I'm going to speak with you all about a topic which I'm really passionate about, which is rooftop farms, as I mentioned. And my first introduction to the topic took place about 9 years ago when I installed a large rooftop farm on a supermarket in the Boston area. So since then, I have been continuing to pursue this interest, developing and installing rooftop farms throughout the US, and working on some projects abroad as well. In addition to that, really trying to build a network of rooftop farm practitioners, designers, installers throughout the world. Green roofs are a small subsect of construction, and rooftop farms are an even smaller group of people. And so for today's talk, I've really done my best to sort of break things down into a few short subsections. And I wanted to start off with a broad overview of rooftop farms, and then talk a little bit about the concept of social infrastructure, which is often the way that I sort of conceptualize rooftop farms. And then I wanted to share with you all a project profile from a farm in Boston at a hospital, which is the Boston Medical Center rooftop farm. And then kind of round it off with a few takeaways, lessons learned, some sort of big picture ideas. So this is a topic which I could definitely talk about for hours and hours. I'm trying really hard to speak very slowly. But if you want to talk more, please feel free to get in touch via email, social media, or just after this talk at the networking event. So I'm assuming that most of you don't know who Recover are. Recover Green Roofs, the company that I'm with. As I mentioned, we're a mission-driven company. We really take a few things seriously: green infrastructure, green roofs, and our motto is people, profit, planet. So we take seriously not only the work that we do, but also the employees that we work with. We're about 30 people in total, and our employees we actually just did a survey where our employees are very happy with what we do. And they've all kind of come from a diversity of backgrounds. So we have designers, we have landscape architects, we have installers, we have some folks who are coming to our company from the construction industry, et cetera, et cetera. And so we really find it's very important to have that diversity to really build a strong coalition when you're working on these projects. And so our projects are really focused initially we're really focused on the Boston area. But what we soon realized was that the sort of expertise that we were bringing to the table was a little bit unique for the United States, which still has a very young green roof industry. And so our work has really expanded, and we've started to, I don't know how many people, I'm sure most people are familiar with where New York and Washington, D.C. are, but our work really spans sort of the entire upper half of the East Coast of the United States. And then actually recently we've been working on some urban agriculture projects in Texas, in the middle of the country, in the Midwest, kind of close to Chicago, and then also on a project in the UK with the NHS. So as I mentioned, we're talking about rooftop farms through the lens of social infrastructure. And why I'm thinking about that is because much of my work over the years has really focused on multifunctional rooftop farm agriculture projects. And I really believe that in order to harness the full potential of a rooftop farm, which some people might think is not the most practical use of a roof, we really need to think dynamically and openly about our goals for the farm space. So as with green roofs, there are a lot of different ways that you could build a rooftop farm and garden. There's really large scale production farms, and then there's also community garden style plots. Some of the farms that are out there are really focused on produce and production and yield. And then other farms are really focused on educational opportunities, social programming, and engagement as their core mission. They're open air, green roof style rooftop farms. And then some of the biggest and most relevant in terms of production farms that are out there are controlled environment agriculture, i.e. greenhouses and hydroponics. And for me personally, I think that some of the most successful examples of rooftop farms are farms that integrate all of those into their programming. So these are some examples of rooftop farms that I found inspiring over the years. And the image on the upper right is Thammasat University, which is in Bangkok. This is a pretty recent installation and one of the most beautiful farms that I've ever seen. And this is a really awesome example of a multifunctional green roof and rooftop farm that is publicly accessible, has a lot of social programming that's involved in the function of the roof, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Hoping to one day visit that farm. Below that, we have Fenway Farms, which is located on Fenway Park, which is where the Boston Red Sox, the baseball team, plays. And you can only see about a third of the farm in this picture. But what is really unique about this farm is that it's highly visible from all the sports fans who are visiting the park. So this is a professional sports team that gets millions of visitors every year. And this farm is seen by most of those visitors. So it's unbelievable exposure for the community, for the movement, both with rooftop farming, but also green roofs. And then on the lower left, we have Brooklyn Grange. And this is this is in Brooklyn, New York. And this is their Navy Yard rooftop farm. And the Brooklyn Grange, if anybody is unaware of them, should check them out. They're an amazing organization out of New York, and they're really one of the pioneers within rooftop farming. And this is one of, I think, 5 or 6 rooftop farms in the New York area. And they just opened up one of the largest rooftop farms in the world, which is 100,000 square feet, which I think is maybe 10,000 or 15,000 square meters. So they're a really impressive organization and a collaborator over the years with Recover. And then on the upper left is Whole Foods Linfield, which is a supermarket outside of the Boston metro area. And this was my first farm that I installed, and this was back in 2013. And it has really sort of spurred my interest in the industry and really kind of got me started. So the next few slides are a few examples of different styles of buildups. And they were kind of really looking at the 4 farms that we have here, but in a little bit more detail, just focused on the system buildup. So we have an open soil system. This is a term that I've been calling these styles of farms. Different people call them different things. This is really an intensive style green roof that utilizes continuous substrate throughout the roof and mounded areas for the production area. So I've never done this before, but let's see. So these are rows here, and they're about 12 inches. Maybe that's 30 centimeters, maybe this big. Sorry. So there's rows. Yep. So there's rows here that are raised, and then there's walking paths in between, and there's a deeper soil profile in the walking paths, and you have a deeper soil profile where you're growing the vegetables. The next is a modular or container farm. And in this image, you can see a few different options for how this is done. I'm sure most of you are familiar with, container gardening or container growing. And the basic concept is that you're using very lightweight, usually fairly affordable containers. These are typically made out of geotextiles or filter fabrics. And what you're seeing here is an example of these containers being installed on a roof in the Midwest of the United States. Next, we have raised beds, which you might find on a community gardens plot or an allotment space, or in somebody's backyard or in somebody's personal garden. And these are really similar to the modular system, just on a larger scale. And then we have a hybrid design, which is really a mixture of the various styles of buildup. And this is definitely one of my favorite kind of approaches to rooftop farms. And you can see on the lower right is an example of some continuous intensive green roof style rooftop farm beds, as well as some raised beds. And then on the upper image, which is a concept design that my team has been working on for Harvard University, trying to convert a parking garage into a rooftop farm and living lab classroom space. You have a variety of spaces. You have a greenhouse, you have some intensive green roof areas with perennials, you have some growing beds and some raised beds. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. So moving on to social infrastructure. So what do I mean when I say social infrastructure or socially engaged green infrastructure? So I want to start by saying that it's a pretty broad subject, and a lot of proponents kind of cherry pick and use different terms to describe the concept. But in my world, I've come to think of social infrastructure as both physical and service or organizational infrastructure that facilitates social services or services and brings people together in a social connective link. And typically, social infrastructure is used to describe sort of a human-centric view. But if I were to think beyond the human-centric lens with which we typically talk about our infrastructure, I might also include in this definition elements that accommodate non-human services that we strive to provide for our flora and fauna communities. So green infrastructure as social infrastructure. When we consider green infrastructure as social infrastructure, there's really sort of endless possibilities. I think everyone in this room is likely aware of the transformative power of green infrastructure or green roofs. And I think if we leverage that in a certain way, in the right way, depending on your approach, can really serve as a powerful tool for creating social engagement and social infrastructure. So for some examples of how green infrastructure can function in this way, or what sort of services it can provide, we can consider a few things. We have public access to green space, which we've talked a lot about today, and this includes farms and gardens, allotment spaces, and community garden spaces. We can have living laboratory spaces and classrooms where students can learn about biology or ecology. We can have nature-based prescriptions, which I'm not sure if that's a common thing here, but is starting to become more common across Europe, and preventative medicine, We have recreational spaces and public parks, areas to socialize and connect with our food systems. And if you think about projects like the High Line in New York City, even elements of transportation. So in addition, from my experience, rooftop farms also serve as a community hub. And as a community hub, they really bring people together from diverse backgrounds, and they can offer a place to connect, learn, and help city dwellers or people that the urban population feel a sense of ownership with the land and the buildings that they live in. So all of the images in this slide sort of represent what I mean by social engagement. We have lessons in beekeeping in the upper right, to some community murals and paintings in the lower right, to a community installation of a rooftop farm on the left, as well as some doctors engaging with a rooftop farm on the lower right. Oops. This is a video. I'm not sure if it's going to play. Looks like it won't. So this is a really nice video of a rooftop farm in Chicago, and I wanted to show it because it's a very wild farm, which I find really interesting and extremely biodiverse. But we can imagine what it looks like. It's a drone footage of this farm. And I think what I wanted to talk about as this video was playing was why I think it's important that we talk about green infrastructure through the lens of social infrastructure. And really it is the more dynamically we think about green infrastructure and the benefits that it can provide us, the more successful our infrastructure will be. And I think a lot of this is kind of obvious, but it's really important to conceptualize and think about it as we're planning our roofs. And so it's really that if we're planning for stormwater management and also planning for local food production or spaces where we're gonna operate job training or educational training or living lab classrooms or public green space, that as we start to conceptualize and design these spaces, we really keep the social components at the forefront, in the front of our minds. And I imagine that many of you here who have worked on green infrastructure projects understand that sometimes the people who are involved in the projects don't always have the best interests at heart, and you're at times trying to kind of compete with varying degrees of power and money within a project. So as I've mentioned, there's a project in Boston at the Boston Medical Center rooftop farm, which I think is a really great example of many of the things that I'm talking about. So I wanted to go into a little bit of a project profile and share with you all a little bit about this farm. So the Boston Medical Center is Boston's most important safety net hospital, which is a little bit of maybe a foreign concept to most Europeans. I'm not exactly sure. But it's a hospital that historically has served the most vulnerable and poorest populations of our city and our region. And through this work that it's done in service to this community, it's really pioneered many innovative and groundbreaking programs, many of which have been emulated throughout the world. And one example of a groundbreaking program that's been pioneered at Boston Medical Center is a program called Nourishing Our Communities, which is the home of the rooftop farm. So the rooftop farm is within this program. And the Nourishing Our Communities program has a mandate to provide healthy food and nutrition to the hospital community. And this program is centered around the hospital's internal food pantry or food bank, which was the first of its kind in the United States, and which serves close to 90,000 patients and families per year with free food donations. And so the purpose of this program is to address nutrition-related illnesses by providing food that are often lacking in families' or patients' diets due to cost or accessibility. So individuals with special nutritional needs are referred to the food pantry or food bank by doctors and providers who write prescriptions for them about supplementary foods that are both medically and culturally appropriate for the patient and the family member. So at the heart of the program, in my perspective, is the rooftop farm. And in 2017, my team, in collaboration with a local farm management company, Higher Ground Farms, and the hospital, designed and installed the region's first rooftop hospital farm. And the farm was inspired by another one of Recover's rooftop farms. And the director of the Nourishing Our Communities program happened to visit this farm and decided that he wanted to work with our team to create a similar farm in his hospital. And he really wanted a multifunctional farm ecosystem that could both feed and educate the hospital community. So the Boston Medical Center Hospital complex is a very large complex for the city of Boston. And the city of Boston is full of hospitals and universities, kind of two of our major things. And this complex is about 7 or 8 buildings. There's a university attached to it. And so as the director of the Nourishing Our Communities program started to look for potential sites for the rooftop farm, we explored a number of different buildings. And it was decided that the hospital's power plant, where they generate their own electricity, was the best location for the farm. And the reason for this was that, as you can see from this image, it's a fairly large roof. It gets great sun exposure throughout the day. It has a great, it has an appropriate structural load capacity for essentially an intensive green roof. It's also protected by a high parapet wall around the perimeter of the farm, which allows for public access and is actually a great wind buffer in the windy season. And one of the things that's really nice about this location is that it's also connected to the hospital. So this building, along with all of the buildings at the hospital complex, are all accessible to one another through either underground passageways or above ground passageways. And so what that means is that the produce can be picked at this farm, and within 5 minutes, it can be in the food pantry or the food bank or within the hospital kitchen. So with some direction from the hospital team to develop a modular and very organized farm system, the design team at Recover worked with Higher Ground Farms to design a high yield and low structural load farm system that would also be visually appealing and accessible. And by visually appealing to the hospital, that meant very geometric, very sharp, very clean. And as I've said before, there's a lot of different styles of rooftop farms, and each really has its own advantages. And for the design of this farm, we utilized our RAM system, which stands for, it's an acronym that stands for Recover Aerated Media Module. And you can see it here in our specification sheet, as well as in action on the right. And the RAM is a really low-cost modular planter that is super lightweight, it's very durable, and it's one that really scales up or down depending on the size of the project. Let's see, this is also a video. Yep. So there are a number of reasons why the RAM is an effective and efficient food production growing system. So it uses highly breathable crates and liners, which allow the roots to air prune and really maximize their biomass. Within each module is also a precision drip irrigation emitter, which really allows the farmer to fine-tune the amount of water that each row or each module is receiving, making the water management system super efficient. Overall, because of their modularity and their ease of install, it makes for a very fast installation and also is just great for community engagement. And the video that you just saw was actually taken from an installation a few years back in St. Louis, Missouri, when we engaged about 20 or 30 volunteers from the community to help us with the preparation for the installation of the rooftop farm. So back to Boston Medical Center. So after we installed the farm in 2017, the farm was immediately prepared for the growing season. And you can see in this image, the farmer Lindsay, who is right here on the right, is working on cultivating some leafy greens. And you can also see in this image, which I believe is about 2 months into the growing season, the diversity of crops that we grow on the farm. And while the overall yields of produce changes from year to year, this year we had quite a bit of drought like everywhere else. Overall, the farm produces around 3,000 kilos of produce per year, which of course is a drop in the bucket or a small amount compared to the overall needs of the food pantry. But nonetheless, it's a great way to engage and provide that local food. And although it's really challenging to sort of draw some direct comparisons around productivity, and I'm not sure I really need to do this or like doing this, but the farmer here, Lindsay Allen, she's actually a ground level farmer and has been farming for 20 or so years at ground level. And because of the modularity of the system and the way that the soil breathes, the lack of pests on a roof, she actually believes that this farm is close to twice as productive as a local farm that you would have on the ground in the same region. So after the food is grown, where does it go? So I mentioned that we have a prescription-based food pantry, and I spoke about this earlier, but it's just really want to drive that home. So majority of the food ends up in this pantry where doctors are able to prescribe produce, which I just think is an amazing concept. The other places that it goes are a test kitchen, which is part of the same program. And what's really nice about this is that a patient can get prescribed some produce, some vegetables, and then they can go to a test kitchen where they can learn about how to utilize that produce and cook the produce and create healthy meals. In addition to that, we have a subsidized farmers market where members of the local community can purchase produce at a very low rate grown on the farm. So engagement. So in addition to producing the food, the farm also hosts events and social gatherings, tours, and educational opportunities. I'm going to kind of move through this quickly. But in terms of numbers, each year the farm hosts close to 240 volunteers. We host 400 youth visits, so that's visits by young people under the age of 18. They have 7 weeks of free summer camp that take place on the farm, and we have over 1,000 visitors each year on this farm. So I won't run through each one of these images, but most of these images were taken within the last year or so of engagement that happened on the farm space. So after 6 years in production, I'm happy to report that the farm is thriving. It's such a success that in 2023, the hospital plans to install a second rooftop farm that will triple the capacity of the existing farm. It's also going to serve as a hub for a number of youth groups, including a place for small concerts with a youth empowerment recording studio. And so the second farm is going to be located just a few blocks from the existing farm, and it will take advantage of a more traditional green roof approach to reduce the use of plastics, synthetic turfs, and increase stormwater capacity and all of the environmental benefits that we all know are associated with green roofs. So over the next few months, much of my work is going to be focused on the design and the development of this new farm space. And as I work with my team, I'm kind of considering all of the lessons I've learned over the years. And I thought I would share a few of them. Many of them are pretty obvious, but I thought that they were worth reiterating. The first point is really design for the community we wish to serve. So that's keep in mind who we're designing for and who is the end user of our projects. we must find a project champion. This is really an important part of my process. And that's somebody who can champion a project, who has passion and resources to build momentum, make connections, and really create a buzz or some energy around a rooftop farm project. Connecting with stakeholders is super important, community stakeholders, to make sure that the end uses of the goals, the restrictions of the community, what are their needs, what are not their needs, are really designed into the project. And we really must bring together a passionate team of experts, whether that be landscape architects, ecologists, farmers, designers, etc. We also must engage with our cities and our planners. This is something that is super relevant to what's happening in the United States right now. Green infrastructure is still a little bit unusual, and so it's really important that we engage and we educate our cities and our government. We also need to develop plans for funding, short and long term. These projects need funding up front, and they also need long-term funding to help them function properly over the years. And most importantly, we got to keep at it. Rooftop farms don't happen overnight, and in most cases, they take years to develop. But as with any project, there's going to be setbacks, but we need to believe in our vision and just keep moving forward. So thank you all, and I enjoyed the conversation, and I hope to have more of it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Pete. Okay, it was a pleasure for us to have you here. You're staying with us for networking, please. Yeah, okay. To enjoy your jet lag more. Okay, this is my... Okay. Okay, je to jasné, že v tejto chvíli je to aj o tom, že otázky budú v rámci networkingu. Ten nasleduje potom, čo ešte máme nejakú povinnosť. Viac o nej teraz povie Braňo, poprosím ťa. Skončili sme tú časť, ktorá znamená prednášky, respektíve príspevky tých, ktorí mali čo povedať v rámci tejto konferencie. A v rámci toho, že nasleduje aj oceňovanie, tak k tomu trošku možno viac. Či to bude s vydýchaním, alebo ideme v kúse.
Si ma zrušil, lebo ja som sa chcel opýtať otázku.
Aha, tak pozri sa, ty sa pýtaj a ja teraz idem za Pítom.
Mňa by ešte zaujímalo ohľadne tých fariem, pretože sú to projekty, ktoré nie sú bežné. U nás myslím, že ani v Českej republike, možno Pavel bude vedieť povedať, že či niečo vzniká, mám taký pocit, že v Česku je nejaká farma, ktorá je v procese. Že akým spôsobom sú tie farmy zalievané, že či používate nejakú šedú vodu, dažďovú vodu alebo nahulovata pitnú?
Ja len som z dohľadu strátil Pavla.
Okay.
Alebo sa pýtame Píta.
Píta.
OK. Ešte raz.
The question was, what kind of water do you use?
Kind of water?
Yeah, for during irrigation.
That's a good question. So different farms use different methods of irrigation. If I had the slide still up, I referenced the Brooklyn Grange as kind of a pioneer within the industry. And they have developed a few systems that are using a recycling system, so a gray water system, where they're capturing runoff from the other roofs that the farm is adjacent to irrigate the roof. The roof at Boston Medical Center is city water, which is filtered. But it is directly from the city water supply. And then there's a number of other farms that also utilize kind of a mixture of either a gray water system or direct from the city. And I think in an ideal world, we'd be trying to take advantage of as much runoff directly from the building as possible on all of these projects.
Môžeme kľudne vylúžiť ešte priestor na otázky, lebo tu máme nejaké technické veci, ktoré potrebujeme doriešiť.
So we've got more questions, okay? So
don't go away.
Pekný deň, bolo to super, úžasné. A mám možno také drzé otázky, či používate pesticídy a nejaké hnojivá a zároveň ako dlho vydrží substrát, ktorý máte v tých bedničkách, či po sezóne 2 sa to nejako obmienia a čo je to vôbec za substrát?
That's a great question as well. And there's not one substrate that we've used for all of our farms. Each farm has, in many ways, a unique blend based on the needs of the project. And the containers, the smaller containers, what we're calling the rams, they use a different substrate that we might have in a more of an intensive style green roof. But I think the point is that you can really adapt different soils and different profiles of blends to your roof. And what we found is that using a soil or a substrate that is mineral heavy, which is similar to a green roof style media, with some additional amendments, and often that's biological soil amendments. So typically compost or compost tea or other biological soil amendments that we might add. Somebody was talking about biochar earlier on, and that is something that we've incorporated into some of our blends. But it's still something that's evolving, and it's not something that we say, hey, we have the perfect answer and this is going to work all the time. It's not like that. It's something that a lot of people are learning how to manipulate and use, but it's an evolving industry, and it's also a very small industry. And so we need innovation, and we need people to start researching this. But in general, we do use substrates that are more similar to green roof substrates than your traditional farm. And almost all of the farms that we are a part of and that I know of that are on roofs do not use pesticides. They use composts, compost teas, and other natural biological amendments. So that's a really cool aspect of this. And we can talk about this later.
Thank you. Ďalšia otázka ešte bola niekde? Tu sú.
Zdravím, tak a ja by som rád vedel, čo robíte so záhradným odpadom.
So the question was, what do I do with the garden waste? And I assume you mean sort of after the end of the season, you have their stalks and your leaves. So typically, there's a few different ways that can happen. Some of our farms do have composting on site. So we're able to compost either hot compost or worm compost on the roof. Other sites don't have that accessibility to a composter. And so we take all of the waste to a site where it's composted. And that's either a community composter or a city composter. And then sometimes it comes directly back to us. Other times it kind of goes through a cycle and we get composted as more of a mixture. But typically all of it gets composted. And in some cases, we're able to essentially just let the vegetative matter, the plant residue, stay on the beds at the end of the season like you would with a traditional farming system. So as a cover crop, cut them and let them overwinter like that.
Next one, ďalší.
Ja som sa len chcel opýtať na otázku, ktorá tu už odznela, a to je lifespan toho substrátu, ktorý používate. Rozumiem, že nemáte jednotný, ale aký je aspoň približný ten lifespan?
Konečne recept nejaký.
Unfortunately, there's no perfect answer for that. But we've had farms that are in production for 10 plus years, and the substrate is doing well. I mean, every year you're adding some compost or you're adding some biological amendments. But in general, the mineral content within green roof substrate can last 50, 100 more years. And so what you're really adding each year is organics. And so as long as you're regularly adding organics, and certainly not adding too many organics, which can add to problems with the soil, but if you're having regular upkeep for the soil and maintaining it, I can't say for sure that this would, a farm would last for 50 years, but we hope that these farming systems could last for 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
OK, thank you, ďakujem. Máme ešte otázky? OK. S tým jedným mikrofónom je to super, ale ja som si nezobral smart hodinky, by som nakrokoval dnes.
I would have a question about the whole concept. Are these roofs serving the purposes of the owner, or is there any case like you rent the roof and some kind of community use it for own purpose? Thank you.
Ráďo nám zjedol mikrofón.
That's a really nice question, and it depends on the farm. So the hospital has a mandate to provide health care for the citizens of the region, and the farm is part of that mandate. And so the intention and purpose of this farm is really to serve the local community. And then with other farms, such as Brooklyn Grange and their farms, or another really great example of a rooftop farm that's not a green roof, is Lufa Farms up in Montreal, Canada. And they have the world's largest greenhouse on a roof, and they also have, I think, 7 or 8 greenhouses on roofs in the Montreal region, and they're very much a for-profit business. And so the produce within those greenhouses ends up in stores to be sold. And there's another example, Gotham Greens, which is a New York-based company, and they sell microgreens. And again, it's a for-profit business. But the majority of our farms that we've installed, and I'm not exactly sure why this is, I think that rooftop farms are a little bit of a hard sell when you're talking to developers, when you're talking to owners of buildings. And so you really need to have a community organization that can fund it and also build momentum around it, and also have multifunctional space, because at the end of the day, the farm that I described at the hospital, it certainly does produce produce, but the most important element of that farm is not the produce. That's one element that is very important. And so I think my point is that it depends on your business model within your farm. And personally, I think that some of the most successful examples are farms that really focus on broader social implications rather than just the produce. So I hope that somewhat answered your question.
OK, ďakujem pekne. Posledná otázka.
In a previous presentation, we heard about the quality of the honey from the roof. How it is with the quality of the vegetable or the fruits from the farming?
They're delicious. And we have had quite a bit of honey that has come from a number of our farms, which has also been delicious. I can't say in terms of from a testing perspective. We have had some of this, we've had tissue samples taken from a number of the vegetables that have been grown on the hospital. And the reason for that was we wanted to make sure that there was no contamination issues. Of course, that would be counterintuitive and counterproductive. And we have certainly taken water quality tests at all of the farms. But in terms of the quality of the produce, I would say that in general, it's much higher quality than the produce or the vegetables that you would find at the market. But I can't say in terms of its nutritional value, we haven't tested all of the soil. I mean, we haven't tested all of the produce. And I wish I was inspired by the honey samples. And I wish that I was able to bring some samples, because it is a really delicious honey and has a unique flavor profile.
OK, ďakujem veľmi pekne. Thank you so much. Thank you. Môžete zatlieskať, áno, zaslúži si to. Pete, Ellis.